I'm Eileen Roche, editor of Designs and Machine Embroidery magazine, and I'm here today to share with you my #1 reason why I love an embroidery machine. It can duplicate any task you assign it to, such as these adorable quilted clutch accessories. These are all made in the hoop, and the beautiful part of it is you really don't need good cutting, tracing, or even sewing skills. Let me show you why. Here's your embroidery design. It is for a large hoop. It includes the quilted pattern, that grid that's going to stitch absolutely perfect. And it has two outer lines that are outlines that stitch around the perimeter of the shape of the pattern. The outside line is going to be your cut line. So after you make this beautiful embroidery design on your quilt, on your batting and top fabric, you will cut it out on that outside line. And then you'll use the inner line as your sewing line. So you don't even have to pay attention to seam allowance. You just have to sew with the needle penetrating on that stitch line. Let's take a look at the different fabrics that you can use. As you know, there are so many choices today, but consider the scale of the fabric itself, because this medium scale, or really kind of a large scale chevron pattern, loses the pink, which is my favorite color on this whole fabric. And you know, I only get to see a little piece of it. So this probably wasn't a great choice for this clutch. On the other hand, this smaller print is absolutely perfect. But let's take a look. If we do have a really large print, like this repeated motif, it would be hard to decide where to place this fabric in the hoop. So I've taken that same embroidery template and I've cut out the interior right along that inner stitch line, and I place that on my fabric and decide what motif I want to have as the center medallion on the clutch. It could be this beige, it could be this avocado green, whatever you decide. After all, it's your bag. So once you determine which one is going to be what I call the hero, you then take a target ruler and match those legs, that's what we call those arms or legs that are sticking out from the center, with the crosshair that's on the template. And then I just take a target sticker and put that inside. This is designating the center of the embroidery design and will help me get square in the hoop, and it will also let me position the needle dead center over that positioning sticker. So we're going to go to the machine. Now that I already have my small print fabric and regular batting, hooped, no stabilizer is required because these are all running stitches on this particular design. They're just quilting stitches. So let's attach this to the machine and select our design. I already have it up on the screen, so I'm just going to lower the presser foot and let her stitch. The first stitches that it's going to do is the quilt pattern itself. And if you've ever tried to stitch a perfect half-inch grid, you'll know how tricky that can be. So when your embroidery machine does it for you, it's perfect. We'll let that stitch a little. You know, if you are a true quilter, you would probably select a thread that blends with the fabric. If you're an embroiderer like me, you might select a fabric that really, not a fabric, but a thread that really pops and lets everyone know just how many stitches you took. But the choice is yours. I would suggest using a contrasting thread for color #2, which are those outlines, because they'll be helpful to really see when you're doing the sewing part of the design. So we're going to stop this because you don't need to watch this entire design stitch out. But once it's complete, we'll stop and cut our thread and then remove the hoop and take it out of the hoop. And I have one that I have already completed over here, and I've even started the trimming. So I'll take my scissors and I'm just cutting right along that outer stitch line, that outer cut line. And when I do that, I'm going to get a perfect duplication of the other side of the bag that I already did. So when you make this clutch, you're going to make 2 quilted fabric sections and 2 lining sections for the front and the back. You want to clip those corners because that's the key to boxing your corner. We'll get to that part in a little bit. So right now I'm matching the bottom seam, and I'll use some clips to piece that together. And then I'm going to switch over to sewing so you can see how this will work. Now that I have my sewing foot on, I'm ready to stitch that bottom seam. And I just place the fabric right sides together underneath the needle, and I want to make sure that my needle is centered over that stitch line that I pointed out earlier. And I just stitch right on that all the way across to the other corner. And I can lock my stitches at the end so that I have a nice secure stitch, and then cut them. Then I would take this to the ironing board and I would press this seam open, because you do want to have that open and smooth down. But I have one that I have already started, because our next step is to sew our side seam. I have one side done, so let's go ahead and do the other. We just match those raw edges, place it underneath our presser foot, and press go, following that stitch line, and I'm going to stitch all the way to this little stitch mark. It's kind of a notch, and that's where you will stop stitching. Once you have that done, our side seams are closed, and now it's time to box the corners. So I'm pressing open the seam allowance on the side with my fingers, and the same on the bottom seam. And I just take a clip and hold that open. We want to make sure that's open nice and flat. And then we do the same over here on this corner. And so when you pull these two sections together, it gives you a nice flat seam on the edge, even though you started kind of with a triangle. So let's place that underneath the presser foot. Again, using your stitch mark as a guide. You don't even have to pay attention to the seam allowance. And press go. And lock those stitches. And then repeat for the other side. Okay, so now my bag is all pieced together. Now I'll turn this right side out. You would go to the ironing board and you would press this and make sure that you get a nice box corner, that all the edges are nice and crisp. And then we'll work on our lining. You will have hooped lining fabric and stitched the lining file that accompanies this embroidery pattern. And basically, it's just the two outer lines. So that's all that is. Again, I didn't use any stabilizer on that one, but I did add a monogram to the other side. And I used a poly mesh permanent cutaway stabilizer on the wrong side along with a tearaway. Added my monogram, and then took it out of the hoop, cut on the cut line. And now, when I piece my bottom seam together, you're only going to stitch to that stitch mark that's in the center. And we'll back up there and cut. And we'll advance to the other stitch mark and then stitch off that edge. And the reason why we do this is how we're going to turn the bag during the, when it's complete, when the inner bag is inside. And then we would do the same on the side seams, but I have one that's already prepared here. As you can see, it's all pieced together. I have my side seam and box corners on the lining, just like I did on the outer bag, and then I put my outer bag inside the lining, right sides together, and I'm going to stitch all the way from here around there, and again from this point all the way around, and that closes my bag. At that point, I have one that's complete. Oh, it's over here, pardon me. It's in here. And I've turned it right side out, and the important thing is to stitch, top stitch all along the edge, because now I will insert glue into the edge of my frame. I just take some metal fabric glue, put it into the channel, wait 2 minutes for it to set the adhesive, and then I insert that quilted clutch right into that channel, and it's perfectly fit. Let it sit for about 2 hours, and it won't come out. Let's take a look at these finished bags, how adorable they are. Imagine how many you could make in such a short time, and everyone will match perfectly.